Okay, thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Joe, Ricardo, yes, Murray, Thomas, Eranos, yeah. So remember that part about animation that Joe was alluding to? Yeah, tonight something different is moving through me. It's been moving through me for a while now. And I actually had another lecture all prepared that was from the new book, but it just didn't land given what's going on today. So I offer you this, and certainly by the time I'm moving through, I will offer some ideas. My mother is Armenian, and my father is Jewish. The horrors of genocide assaulted both sides of my extended family. At family gatherings, which were frequent, there were just very few stories spoken in front of the children about the events that occurred in the home countries. I could feel the wall of silence. Each of the elders in my family had lost loved ones, friends, as well as their homes. The horrors of war and the atrocities of genocide were not spoken of, not explicitly. Yet the grief and the pain was ever present. I could feel it hiding underneath like a poisonous serpent coiled, ready to strike if disturbed. But there was reason for the silence. My parents would simply say, the war, World War II, is over. It was the war to end all wars. Now you can grow up, live your life without fearing this ever-present threat. And two, for my grandparents and their parents, the atrocities of World War I and the organized massacres of the pogroms were also held mostly in silence, only on rare occasions. I would hear them say in hushed whispers, it was unspeakable. Never again. So I, like most, member California, United States, I, like most of my peers, grew up knowing the value of silence and the promise of the new frontier. Prosperity, progress, and prestige was the light on the hill. The lament of the dead, the remembrance of the exterminations was shelved for another time, even put into the deep freeze. We felt safe in the new utopia, in the protective bubble of suburbia. However, as time passed, I found something in me remembered, what I've come to name the deep psyche it did not forget. Vietnam brought back stirrings of generational trauma buried within. When the killings in Vietnam were televised, those images of carnage triggered feelings sourced in the unspoken horrors of earlier times. And it is happening again. It's happening again now. And it's never really too far away. In the United States, just parenthetically, what was different then was that Vietnam was televised. They learned from that experience, never put it on TV. Not a good idea. Back then, that was what was stimulated. Unspeakable war crimes waged against people, places, and creatures are occurring worldwide, as we all know and we've heard. Cities are turned into wastelands of death. The extermination of species and ecosystems is accelerating at an unprecedented speed, and there is no winding down. I promised myself never to come back into this because we know it so much. We know it in ourselves. Why keep re-traumatizing? But sadly, the utilization of collective intelligence, diplomatic skill, and economic sanctions are not working to stop the carnage. Not really, not fully. Through these resources, allow more time and space to live a little longer in the comfort zone. The here and now anguish of the unthinkable asks me, and I'm hearing from so many, ask each of us, right, to face the truth head on. The truth head on. Genocide is present again, and I am feeling, despite myself, the need to respond. But how? And with whom? The ways that are familiar to me: rebellious protest, marching in the streets, writing blistering editorials, raising consciousness, leveraging my capital, all continue to have a rightful place. Yet now, in my 70s, I'm feeling the push of something more, something much more. Like the clinical work that I do in dream tending with trauma, I'm feeling the urgency to help incubate in myself and with others a new story, a larger story, a generative story that originates in a more expansive, illuminated story web of deep imagination. And of course, as we know, we're here. I was offered glimpses of this insight by Jung in the pages of the Red Book. His extraordinary work and active imagination informs my offerings in the many courses and seminars that I teach. Like many, I find gems in his personal and archetypal elaborations. These meta patterns of interrelated story web, a web of stories originating in the autonomous psyche, are intricate by design and elegant emotion. When I'm in this animated matrix, I perceive intimations of new stories, and my senses intermingle. I hear smells, I see sounds, taste feelings, and touch emotions. As Shakespeare offers warmly through King Lear, I see feelingly. I am aware that the stories dominating the psyche in the world of today orient around war and inevitable extinction, yet constellations of countless soul sparks illuminate webs of emerging stories as well. And the authors of these awakening stories, I believe, are often sourced by the souls of the dead and to the voices of the yet to be born. I experience these story writers as originating in the soul bodies of the persons, the creatures, and the landscapes in and of the world. As I stand here today, I feel an urgency. I suspect many of you do. I feel the urgency, the necessity to bring forth in myself and in community the resonating presence of the new stories, forgotten stories, stories originating not in the complexes of ego's power's drive, but in the illuminating presence of an emerging story web, a realm where the intimations of the deep psyche intersect with the generative stories of my life, which, with your indulgence, I would like to share a story. Okay? I'm 2 years old. That's where we start. I was 2 years old. It's the earliest time that I remember visiting my great-grandfather's home, a small 2-story wooden house in South Pasadena, a suburb of Los Angeles. Right behind the home, not more than 30 yards, were the train tracks. Each day, many times over, the reverberations of the trains would fill the neighborhood with sounds of transport and journey. For a little boy, and even for many adults, the locomotion of the trains as they thundered past was loud and also magical. My parents would drop me off and I would spend the morning or the afternoon with Zadie and Bubba, his wife, my great-grandmother. You know, it just occurred to me. I'm remembering how magical those trains were because I grew up in California. Trains were very special. They still are. They're the fascination of children to see a train because we don't see them that often. Whereas here, downstairs in this place, in this house, was the shoe repair shop. Wooden shelves from floor all the way up to ceiling filled with shoes. My great-grandfather was a shoe cobbler who learned his trade in the old country, today known as Belarus. Each time I would come over, he would ask me to tell a story or sing a song. Tell a story, sing a song. For this, he would give me a treasure, a bright, newly minted, shiny copper penny. The terror of me singing a song gave way to the tantalization of that shiny, new copper penny. I loved going over to their house. The smells of Bubba's, my great-grandmother's cooking, waffling down from the upstairs, the sounds of the trains, the twinkle in Zadie's, my great-grandfather's eyes, the good cheer and love was all-encompassing. I remember that the walls were covered with pictures, postcards from around the world. What would happen is people really, as the story will show, they loved my great-grandfather. And they said, is there anything we can do? And when we travel, is there anything that we can get you? And he would just say, yes, a picture postcard of the place. And he would put those all up on the walls. Little scraps of paper also with my great-grandfather's very peculiar, funny, alien handwriting on them. In my times there, I noticed something peculiar. It was odd, really, truly. Many people would come into my great-grandfather's shop bringing their shoes, but often would leave without picking them up. Everybody was coming in, but nobody was taking the shoes out. And the shelves were just getting bigger, bigger, more and more shoes. However, I watched because people would come into the shoe shop and they would sit and they would listen. And Zadie would tell his stories. I noticed that when they left the shop, they too had that same twinkle that was in my great-grandfather's eyes. Something was happening here in addition to the craft of shoe repair. My great-grandfather, he died. He died when he was 93 and I was 5 years old. My life went on, of course. Memories of my great-grandfather dimmed. Modern culture was speeding up. And as I've shared with you, my parents hardly ever talked about him. Then, when I was 20, something very out of the ordinary occurred. It came in a dream. I was attending what in the United States is a human potentials movement, 60s, 70s. And there I was in Santa Cruz. And in the dream that night, I heard a voice. It said, find the book. Find the book. The dream was different than anything I've ever had before, right? The voice was very clear and more like a commandment. I was shaken, but aware of the warmth I felt for my nearly forgotten great-grandfather, I remembered his words, find the book. When I shared the dream, I shared the dream with the workshop leader, and she said very directly, Stephen, you need to go find that book. I was taken aback. I was in that counterculture, so nothing was too out of the ordinary, but that really got me, that piece. So I called my great aunt, Gertrude, Zadie's sister, who I hadn't spoken with for 20 years. She was always a bit odd, but growing up, she was my very favorite relative. Over the phone, without any hesitation, she said, I know just what you are talking about. come right over. The next day, I made the drive to her small home in Altadena, right next to Pasadena, where my great-grandfather lived. As we sat together in her living room, she asked me what I remembered about her older brother. I said, obviously, the shiny pennies, right? And that there was something special about being there. She smiled and then pointed to a wooden chest covered with an embroidered cloth, right, over on this side of the room. And there was a vase of flowers, I'll never forget, right on the top. Then she said, Stephen, in her kind of otherworldly voice, Stephen, in that chest is a book that will give you what you are looking for. I have saved it all these years, waiting for the person who would come to find it. And now it is yours. Okay. She opened the chest, reached down, retrieved the book, handed it to me. And when I opened it, I noticed a couple things. The language was nothing that I was familiar with to begin with. It wasn't in English, of course. And the book started from the back, not from the front. Also alien to me, of course, Yiddish. Also on the front page, I saw a photograph of my great-grandfather with his wife at his side. And those deep, compassionate eyes, really, when they met mine, I just felt my heart deepen. And that twinkle in his eyes in that picture met my eyes. Whoa, that was a moment. The book is called Der Schuster, which means the shoe cobbler. It is a book about his life and his stories. I couldn't wait to read what was inside, but as I said, it was in Yiddish. Now what? There's only one thing to do as an industrious person wanting to get this done. And the months passed, but I finally located a woman in Brooklyn, New York. An elder Jewish woman living in Brooklyn. And she came from the same home place in the old country as my grandfather, my great-grandfather. She translated the book from Yiddish to English, and she was working from an old, if you remember those Remington typewriters, 2 fingers, 1 page at a time. And every 5 to 10 days, I would receive in the hard mail 2 pages of carbon copied translation of the book. I cherished reading the stories, discovering more of his life, and so much in his teachings. I discovered that my great-grandfather, Zadie, was a Zadok. His learning was rooted in the oral tradition passed down through the generations. Can you imagine? This whole thing was like, only now in reading the book of my life backwards, right? I realized that those weeks, those months, it was about 3-4 months, pages every couple of weeks, that so much of who I am was really woven into the readings of those pages day by day. From the field of study that I would pursue, to who I would marry, to founding an institute, to being here today, the stories in that book, on the lines and between the lines, were, for me, a guiding light. Then my life got busy. Okay? I'm about 23, 24 right now. My life got very busy. I graduated from UCLA. I taught middle and senior high school for 3 years in Santa Monica. My late 20s, I moved to Santa Barbara to start graduate studies. Securing a work-study job, I helped begin the community counseling center in Alla Vista, a little college community next to the university. I got married. We had a family. And as Joe mentioned, those were the times that we developed Pacifica Graduate Institute. And my great-grandfather's book once again found a resting place in another chest in the back bedroom of our home, again left unattended. Decades passed. Then 15 years ago, while having lunch with students at the cafeteria on the Pacifica campus. Like a bolt of lightning, Zeit, my great-grandfather, once again made a visitation. A graduate student in our depth psychology program who also had founded a Jewish cultural center in Los Angeles approached our table. He had just read something that I had written in the book Dream Tenting, where I alluded to my great-grandfather. He looked at me in the eye and asked, "Dr. Aizenstat, is your great-grandfather Harry Goldfarb?" I was stunned. Harry Goldfarb? I mean, Harry Goldfarb? How would anybody know him by his birth name? And then after a moment of reflection, I simply answered, yes. I think I got the yes out. It was more, you know. Then he went on and asked my first name about my father, my mother, aunts, uncles. I was speechless. How could he know this? I mean, how would he know this? There was a pause. All of us at the table were now in a state of silent awe. You should have seen it. It was a group of about 10 students. We're sitting there, it's a spring day. We're having lunch. There's nothing out of the ordinary going on. And he goes on this, and we just all got into this silent place. He then looked at me directly and asked, "Are you Stevie? Are you Stevie, the child in his book who visited the shoe cobbler's shop and got us shiny pennies for singing songs? Is that you, Stevie?" In quiet disbelief, I simply replied once again, "Kinda, yes, that's me." I was without breath. He continued, "Did you know your grandfather, Zellman, the shoemaker's work and writings are studied somewhat widely, that stories about his life are archived at UCLA, USC, and there are study groups that journey each summer to his home village in Belarus?" I'm feeling what I felt then right this moment. I don't know if I can say this now. I just, holy shit. Really? I didn't know. Embarrassingly, and I have to say, really embarrassingly, I had no idea. Imagine. Fate, like the hand of an author of a bigger story, had once again touched my shoulder, like in the dream. The saga continued. Didn't stop there. 2 years later, I was offering a series of lectures and seminars in Moscow to a group of Jungian analysts and their extended community. After the second day, I was approached by a small group who had journeyed from the Minsk area. They shared with me, "We would like to talk to you." I mean, I'll never forget this. They're in the back. And I was finished with the lecturing, and they pulled me over. "We would like to talk with you about your great-grandfather, Zalman the shoemaker." Once again, I wondered, how did they know? When I asked, they replied, "Well, we had your book Dream Tending translated into Russian. We discovered that your great-grandfather is born next to our hometown. We were very touched by what we read and wanted to come to meet you." Then, with deep feeling, they added, "Dr. Aizenstat, we come here to invite you home." I welled up. I started to cry, actually. It was I'm holding myself in check right now. Because destiny is such a curious phenomenon, isn't it? I mean, we all know destiny, such a curious phenomenon. Once again, fully unexpected, unanticipated, I heard the knock on the door, the greeting from an author of a bigger story. I accepted the invitation. I would make my pilgrimage to the place where my great-grandfather's village once existed. I was going home to my ancestral birthplace, to a place in the old country, a place where my parents had told me through all the years growing up was backwards, simple, and above all, dangerous. The place with so much grief, so much loss, yet now, decades later, I felt a different pull, a yearning, even a desire. Such is the way of calling. I find that when awakened, the soul's need to remember the dead, to return home, to find clan inner and outer, is unrelenting. Of course, before a quest, before any quest, there's preparations to be made. Most every journey, particularly those of longing, do better with some initial grounding, preparing, organizing, formulating, some map making, though we all know, even with the map is never the territory, right? Then I remembered the meeting on campus with a man from LA, from the Jewish Cultural Center. I traveled to Los Angeles for a visit. He had helped many seekers preparing each for their birthright trip. Preparations were now underway. He offered 2 vital resources. He went into the archives and recovered names, locations, history of acquaintances. In addition, he made a call. He contacted a rabbi in Belarus, whose family had lived for many generations in the regions of my great-grandfather's hometown. He offered the maps, he offered everything that we would need, and spoke with that rabbi who was in that area. I was ready to make the journey. I was going home. Several months later, I landed in the Minsk airport. Any of you ever land in the Minsk airport? Whew. You can't imagine, right? Okay, United States, this part of Europe, Minsk airport, different. Passport control was more of an inquisition than a verification. Once through the gauntlet, I met my friend. I left out one little part. I'll just say real quickly. Yeah, I was held in custody. Answered the questions a little wrong. I was still into my fantasy of going home, that whole romantic ideal. Sir, come with me. Down 3 floors, you know that place? I don't know, you don't know that place. Down 3 floors in a room. Only the walls, nobody there, me and the officer. Was I scared? Yeah, I was. I didn't know if I'd ever get out. That's the problem. So I discovered, but my friend, she got me out. The woman that lived, an Jungian analyst that lived in Belarus, she was able to talk things through. And when I met her, her warm smile opened my heart, and her open embrace allowed the apprehension to ease. The high alert in my body was to soften. And I discovered truly right then and there, very important lesson, I've never forgotten this, that there are 2 worlds here in Belarus, like in many places now that I've traveled a lot, extensively especially with Joe when we went to China. There are 2 worlds here, one of repression and fear, the other of compassion and kindness. She took me to my hotel. I met the rabbi in Minsk. He pointed the way. The next morning, directions were made, and we arrived at the destination. Of course, the original homes were destroyed. What a magical journey that was, though. You know, to take that, it's about 2 hours outside of Minsk, fields. Homes were destroyed and the wars of time passed. I was greeted instead by welcoming presence of place, with the sounds of the river flowing, the birds singing, the breeze gently blowing. I experienced the indigenous spirits of this landscape. I spent half a day walking, sitting, listening, reflecting. In child's mind, I imagined what the small town might have looked like. The cobblestone streets that my great-grandfather described in the stories came to life in imagination. I was there in my imagination. The town was there. But then the morning yielded to afternoon, and something more came forward. The feelings hit my stomach first. The visuals came after. I was met by the wailing echoes of the dead, of those who had perished on this land. It was hard to reconcile how this idyllic landscape was also a killing field. Genocide had occurred here. The land remembers, and now so do I. The horrific images of war's destructive terrors that flooded my mind were the visuals that my parents fought so valiantly to keep from their children. Yes, They honored the memories at special occasions, but kept the detailed actualities at a distance. As I shared with you, they so wanted us to experience a different world. But here I was, the images of atrocities vivifying. Once the horror struck, I fell to my knees, of course, in sorrow, and I simply grieved. I grieved for a time. I remember reading my great-grandfather's stories, brief accounts of friends that he had lost, of the wastelands of death that spread across the land during the pogroms. Time passed. Then, and what I want to come to, something different happened. I was in such distress. And then I was met by another experience. It was sparked by the sweet chirping of the birds in the trees above. In a few minutes, I noticed something that I will never, ever forget. The river water glistened from the sun. The glistening caught my eye. Then I saw the twinkle at that moment. In that glistening, I saw the twinkle in my great-grandfather's eyes. His eyes illuminated my own. I began to see differently. The lights came on. From the darkness of the insufferable, I began seeing differently. In the glimmering of the new light, the landscape changed, and I along with it. Stories came forward. As there were sermons in stones, the stories started coming forward from all places. The embodied presence of my great-grandfather was now sitting here alongside me. When I turned, the houses and the people of the village were present. I heard their voices, their laughter, their stories. I was becoming a participant in an illuminated story web of the dead. From the sterility of a war-stricken land came the fertility of emergent possibility. From the intolerable, hints of a new becoming emerged. And my friend, the woman, the analyst, she was there, a saint, really. She sat quietly throughout the day, bearing witness, offering support through her presence. I wrote poetry, or rather, the poetry flowed through me. I journaled, I made counsel with the stones and the twigs. Mostly, I listened and watched. I followed the twinkle of the seen and the unseen. I noticed the sparks dancing, illuminating one scene after the next. At that moment, I remembered one of my great-grandfather's favorite teachings, that the spark of new life is present in all things, living and dead. He said, there is life even in the shoe cobbler's knife. I also remembered my reverence for the soul sparks of Shekinah, whose presence companions me most every morning in the practice of active imagination. My journey now begins with a song by Santana, Put Your Lights On. First the music, then the flow of an illuminated story. There are many kinds. We're coming towards the. There are many kinds of homecoming. Coming home to lineage offers a place in what I refer to as the story web of deep imagination. Here in the remembrance of the dead, imagining is illuminated. Here in the assistance of the yet to be born, soul making is enlivened. Coming home to psyche's authentic desires open in me portals to the yet to be known. Revelation of the hidden brings hints of the emergent possible. Fate brought me to that place in those fields in Minsk. And that same fate brings me here today. I had not a clue that I would be here today. And I certainly did not have a clue that I would be doing what I'm doing. The lecture that was prepared is not this lecture. And I will be submitting that for them. But this is different now. So I just named the three revelations that the journey, my journey in Story Web has opened for me very briefly. First, I have found that the telling and listening to stories invites other stories. That's what I keep getting. I love telling stories. Ever since I was a junior high school teacher, now with my grandchildren, I love telling stories, right? But stories love stories, like dreams. They like to be met by a dream. Stories love to be met by a story, right? And there are different kinds of stories. Stories and a personal life experience, stories that happen in active imagination, sourced by an autonomous psyche. But I noticed in all that stories energize and illuminate the story web of psychic life, a matrix where new or forgotten stories emerge. For me, this process is informed not only by Jung's Red Book, but by what Jung was doing in the Red Book. That doing involves deepening relationship with the autonomy of the story web of deep imagination, as people are sharing again and again and will be for days to come. Okay, Jung offers in the Red Book, they revolve around a central tenet. To be fully alive, we must learn from the past. In symbolic terms, this means giving voice to the dead. The second that I brought is that stories come with the good, the bad, and the horrific. They do. Captivating stories forever offer aspects of the nightmarish. Intolerable image visits my dreams, unfolding my life story. And two, as we know, make visitation in the world. I've discovered that exterminating, eradicating, or medicating these intolerable experiences out of existence does not work all that well, as we've already heard. And for those of us that work clinically, every time you go in that direction, what happens? Come back sometimes twofold. Although we have to be conscious and careful and boundaried and support and care, exorcism doesn't seem to be the answer. Sometimes providing temporary relief, they do, but they come back again, often with additional destructive force. With protection and support, and when viewed as one of the many, I often find aspects of constructive value in the presence of the intolerable. Imago duplex term, it's the one that I use, referring to the proactive energies of the intolerable. When right place, given place, secured in place, I've experienced time and again how the nightmarish can offer generativity, even protective forewarning to and in the unfolding story. Jung offers in the Red Book, because I carried the war in me, I foresaw it. And third, as my stories have described, I experienced the souls of the dead speaking through the story web and asking for a reply. Hearing the lament of the dead is no longer conceptual for me. Here now, along with the yet to be born, their voices, their stories, their presence wait to be heard and embraced. Jung offers again, then turn to the dead, listen to their lament, and accept them with love. The dead can speak only through the living. All right, I'm going to do something that I debated on. It'll take 3 minutes. Right, so this happens. And I mean, how many of us are experiencing, all of us, right? It's happening in the world of today, and we feel it, and it moves through us. Then what? Well, then what is that we need to find forms. I mean, once that nightmarish energy starts to release, either in conversation or in reflection, then what? That's the issue for me. And we need to find different forms. So, given that I'm on an airplane, flying here, and it's a long flight, a number of forms occurred to me. One is an ecological initiative I offered here at Eranos almost 20 years ago now. It's the Global Dream Initiative through the United Nations. And it's a group of people that are really of the same persuasion as we are, working internationally. We meet at The Hague, actually, and putting together a series of imperatives that are being first translated and then disseminated to countries worldwide, addressing very directly the ecological catastrophe and the challenge that we are facing. It's something. If any of you are interested, you can talk with me and I'll show you how you can get involved with that. It's really quite extraordinary. You meet amazing people from all over. And that led me to another idea. You know, I'm up 30,000 feet. Another idea. I thought about, what about us? I mean, truly, here we are together. What about us? And these incredible lectures and ideas are coming forward, both from this podium and between us. What about 3 days from now, we reflect and allow ourselves to contribute to a proclamation that could be disseminated from this body on behalf of this work, that could be disseminated to peoples and governments worldwide. I know that sounds inflated, narcissistic, and everything else, and it's possible. It's possible. Yeah, we've done this at Pacifica once or twice, and it's extraordinary, the impact. It's shocking, particularly in the world of today through social media, it's picked up. Then Ricardo will like this. I was imagining that, the collective red book that we all are beginning to experience, and so many people have given expression to this, the whole dedication of the volumes coming out on the red book all through the years is about that. And something's different now with social media. What would it be like for Eranos or other like-minded institutions to be the place where people in their own work, in their collective red book, come together, offer things, and through social media, they get put together with incredible stewardship, artistry, and mindfulness. And I got to say that 3 times, right? Mindfulness, stewardship, and artistry. That work then comes together as a collective statement, and that gets shared in the world. Right. All that was going on, and then 3 days ago, I get a little something on the email. I didn't even open it until I got onto the airplane, right? And this is where I'll finish. You just imagine a Ukrainian leader and coordinator of Strong in Spirit Online asked if I would offer presentations to volunteer counselors, therapists, spiritual leaders, and/or the Ukrainian community. Reading that, knowing what I was going to be sharing here, I was so deeply touched. My heart just opened. Of course, yes was my reply. It's a privilege to be in service. And then up high, it hit me again. It hit me again. Once again, I experienced the call of home. Call of home. And so that's what I'm going to be doing, is I am going to be contributing with a number of others to that initiative, because it's up right now. And if any of you would like to join in that, please talk with me, because it is, the invitation said, and colleagues. So if you're open and desirous, it's possible. In fact, lecture over. I mentioned the woman in Belarus. And like a number of you, I've traveled pretty extensively in Russia. Certainly Moscow, St. Petersburg, and there are many, many people that we know that are Jungian analysts and/or in the Jungian collective communities. And it's possible now that we can make contact. Telegram is usually the vehicle of choice. Have to be incredibly careful now with how we say and what we say, given that everything is under such incredible surveillance. But I shared back with these folks that I'm so close with. I do dream tending communities there, and Pacifica, we work there with different people doing all kinds of things. And I just shared how heartfelt and how much care and compassion that we were sending to them from our collective community. And the response I got back was, needless to say, extraordinary. They were so touched that they were being remembered. They are frightened, scared. I mean, we don't hear that much about that. And I'm not talking about the Ukraine. I'm talking about in Belarus, in Minsk, and in these other places. They're fearful. They see it unfolding, and they're scared to death. It's about to happen in their world. And they're under such pressure, as you know, economically and everything else, that it's very, very scared now. And they're scared for their children in particular and their families. So, when we're in a gathering like this, there's a portal that opens. a portal, a psychic portal that opens. And if you're willing, we can collectively, as the portal opens, if you want to send an intention of support or care to anybody that you know that are in those countries, from what I'm receiving back on social media, it will be so beautifully and warmly and deeply received and appreciated. So I'll pause for 30 seconds, and in whatever way that makes sense for any of us, this would be the time to do that, a time. Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.